It's Saturday, ladies and gentlemen. We have the most information we've had all week, and it's time to look at some updated fantasy football projections this week. One, to see if we like any of these Pickems, and two, to make sure that we know how we are submitting our starting lineups. Now, of course, these are going to be on Underdog Fantasy. If you're not already on Underdog, it's not too late. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, and the Garrett Wilson special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard. So make sure you take advantage of that. You can find that link in the live chat in the description. But let's get into this. The first game, the Colts, the Patriots. Not going to be super excited to run out there and start guarding Minshew. Minshew's had 15 fantasy points. Obviously, this is someone that has seen some rushing upside this year. Primarily, he's not going to run the ball, so I'm going to be staying away. Jonathan Taylor, must-start guy, 91.5 total yards. Zach Moss, someone that's like in the Tyler Algier mold, as we've said all along. He's a premium head back, but not much more than that. Michael Pittman Jr., you're looking at 6 receptions, 11.5 fantasy points. Pittman is going to be a must-start wide receiver, but nobody else in Indy is interesting. Now, going over to New England, really there's only one guy that we need to be looking at. That will be Ramondre Stevenson, who you currently have at 72.5 total yards. So I'm going to reiterate what we've said every single week now. Ramondre Stevenson, not an exciting player. Ramondre Stevenson, a running back in a horrendous offense, splitting a backfield. Probably shouldn't have taken him as an RB1, but because of his usage as a receiver, you're having to go through and you're having to start him every single week regardless. Now, going over the 49ers game, if you are looking at Brock Purdy, I mean, he only has 8.5 rushing yards as projection, so the issue is you're not going to have the rushing production similar to Gardner Minshew. Passing volume should be a little bit better. He's at about 17 fantasy points. You could start Purdy if you wanted to. I'm not super excited to do so. Now, CMC, obviously the best asset in fantasy. Don't even mind saying that he's going to have more than 16 fantasy points. This game does have the second highest over-under of any game in the NFL this week. Debo currently at 16.5 total yards. You probably have to start Debo Samuel based off the offense he's playing in. You have Brandon Ayuk at 64.5 total yards. You start Brandon Ayuk because the offense he's playing in. And George Kittle, we talked about him being that sell-high candidate over the past few weeks with Debo coming back in. And if you look at the splits with and without Debo Samuel for George Kittle, literally a night and day difference when it comes to the passing volume. So while Kittle is someone that we're still starting, given the upside that he has from a week-to-week perspective, I don't care at all if you were to go through and if you were to take the George Kittle for fewer than 3.5 receptions. He has the big playability, so you need to start him. But 3.5, for him to get to 4 receptions with Debo Samuel, with Ayuk, with CMC, that is asking a lot for a projection. Now, going over to the Jags, you have Lawrence at about 17.5 fantasy points. So right in there in line with what you should expect from Purdy. You have Travis Etienne as that must-start guy, 14 fantasy points. Going over to Calvin Ridley. Obviously, Ridley's been very disappointing this year with Kirk seeing the majority of the volume, which is why I was surprised to see them have Calvin Ridley at 8 targets. Not going to mind taking the fewer on the target mark there, where they only have Christian Kirk with 7 targets. Keep in mind, this is going to be a team that has to go through and throw the ball very often. You have to start Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram, that borderline top 5 tight ends. And if you're looking at the receivers here, I mean, don't love the matchup for Kirk. Don't love the matchup for Ridley, but you probably start him, I guess. And then going over to the Browns, they have Deshaun Watson at 13 fantasy points. The Cleveland Browns had the second lowest implied team total of any team in the NFL this week. Brutal matchup having to go to Baltimore. So you are you're benching every Cleveland Brown. Jerome Ford's only at 9 fantasy points. Amari Cooper currently at about 10. Amari, you can start as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. Just please make sure you lower your expectations. And then David Njoku, not exciting in this kind of matchup. We just want to literally bench everybody in Cleveland if we have the possibility. Really, the only guy that you would consider would be Amari Cooper. Now, Lamar Jackson is a quarterback that I know that has not been getting there as of late. But I mean, if we go back and take just a step backwards to see who Lamar has been historically, Lamar is that quarterback that can rack up rushing touchdowns at a very high clip. They have him for 8 rushing attempts this week and 42.5 rushing yards. I don't mind saying Lamar is going to score a rushing touchdown if we're going to get that 1.5x multiplier on it. Now, keep in mind, this is a very low scoring game overall. This is one of the lowest scoring games in the NFL this week, according to Vegas Sportsbooks. So I don't want to go out there and say you have to go all in, but it is something that's interesting to look at. Andrews, you're clearly starting, but you lower your expectations. He's only at 45.5 receiving yards. And then Zay Flowers, not someone that we are starting this week, even though I do like him in the long term. But ultimately, when you're going up against Cleveland, it is just a very tough game environment overall. Now, going over to what we have in Houston, CJ Stroud, I would highly recommend the more than half a total yard on Underdog Fantasy this week, ladies and gentlemen. But moving this down, I mean, obviously someone that you are starting, they have him at 263.5 total yards. Singletary, you can start if you need to. I'd rank him as that high-end RB3, low-end RB2. It was nice getting the confirmation last week, however, that when we have no Dameon Pierce here, you are going to get Devin Singletary with pretty much every touch out of the backfield. Going over to what we have with the receivers, Robert Woods is playing. They have him at 32.5 total yards. Schultz projects out to be like a borderline top 5 tight end this week. 49.5 receiving yards. They have Noah Brown for the same mark as Zay Flowers, which is interesting. And then Tank Dell with no Nico Collins is probably someone that you have to go through and play, right? Probably need to be playing Tank Dell here. And then going over to the Cincinnati Bengals side of things, you are looking at Joe Burrow, 291.5 total yards, fully good to go, even with the injury to T. Higgins. Mixon, fully good to go. And yes, I understand that a lot of people are worried if Chase is going to play or not. I'm operating under the assumption that Jamar Chase is playing. He's gotten in multiple practices. You have no T. Higgins as well, which I do think incentivizes him to go out there and maybe push it if he wasn't previously. Now, going over to New Orleans, we're not starting Derek Carr. Alvin Kamara, not someone I'm excited about in a non-PPR format, but in a full PPR league, obviously you're excited. I mean, if you look at his reception total every week, 4.5 receptions, right, for his projection. I mean, this is someone that is going to give you an incredible floor on that front. Olave, a young wide receiver, getting double-digit targets every week. You're starting Olave. Nobody else here is that interesting. Maybe Taysom. Taysom, they have at 23.5 rushing yards, which I want to take the lower than on, but also I just lose money betting against Taysom Hill every single week. Now, going over to Minnesota, Joshua Dobbs is actually intriguing this week, given the fact that if you look at his total rushing yards, they almost have him at 30 rushing yards. And this is a team where you have Jordan Addison, you have TJ Hawkinson, and possibly Justin Jefferson. So if you really need a streamer, I think Dobbs is viable. Alexander Madison, they have at 62.5 total yards. A lot of y'all will have to start Alexander Madison, knowing that we have no K-makers here. Obviously, he does project out to get a considerable amount of volume. Jordan Addison is a borderline start. TJ Hawkinson is obviously a locked and loaded guy. What I've been saying right now, if you look at those Pickems, they have Tank Dell about 55.5 total yards. If I remember, they have Addison at about 50. I'm going Tank Dell if Justin Jefferson plays. If Jefferson misses, we are going to go Addison. We will go through and keep on updating y'all with Jefferson as the weekend goes on. Now, going over to Green Bay, you're not starting Jordan Love, 14.5 fantasy points. Cut Jordan Love if you have him. Aaron Jones must start running back with 82.5 total yards, 12.5 fantasy points. Looking at what we have with the receivers here, I've been holding out hope for Christian Watson. Every single week, I'm going, oh, Christian Watson may end up being something. Ooh, we are excited for Christian Watson here. However, it is sad to see that Christian Watson is not turning into anything, ladies and gentlemen. None of the receivers here in Green Bay are worth anything at this point. I mean, obviously, it'd be a little bit different if you had Jordan Love as a good quarterback. Now, Najee Harris does project out to get 10 fantasy points, but the issue is not with the median projection of Najee Harris. It's the fact that he has such a low floor that even if he does project to see that type of volume, it's like, who cares? You know, I don't want to put this guy in my lineup. I'm sorry, such a low ceiling, that is. And then Deontay Johnson seeing a considerable amount of volume. They have him at 5.5 receptions. I almost took the higher than 5.5 receptions. Y'all know George Pickens was a wide receiver that we were saying to sell high on. I mean, as he was going out there and producing with no Deontay Johnson. But now with the expectations of him going down to 42.5 receiving yards, I don't mind saying that he's going to have more than that and just go with the squeaky wheel theory that he's out there complaining, so they're going to throw him the ball just slightly more. I mean, 42.5 is an incredibly low mark. Levis, not interesting given the fact that he is not running the ball. We are hoping he would, but just clearly not happening. Derrick Henry, you have to start, but nobody else in Tennessee outside of Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins will be guys that we're looking at. You have Hopkins at 63.5 receiving yards this week. No Treylon Burks in this game, ladies and gentlemen. Now, going over to Tampa, Baker Mayfield, not interesting because he doesn't run the ball, right? I mean, super simple. Unless you're going to be a top quarterback like Burrow, unless you're that top-end option with your passing volume. You better run it if I'm going to be intrigued. Now, Rachaad White's still someone that I stand by. You have to start this guy every single week, regardless of matchup, specifically with his receiving usage. However, if you're looking at the matchup against Tennessee, this is a Tennessee rush defense that typically we look to avoid. Plus, at the same time, he's currently sitting at 81.5 total yards. So I don't mind going through and saying he's going to have fewer than 81.5 total yards while still playing him because of his receiving involvement. And then you play Godwin, you play Evans. You can't play Cade Otton if you really wanted to. They have Otton at 3.5 receptions and 6 fantasy points. Now, going over to Detroit, this is one of the quarterbacks that I am fine playing, even though he does not have rushing upside with Jared Goff. This is supposedly the highest scoring game of the week, according to Vegas Sportsbooks. And while, yes, David Montgomery coming back in will lower our expectations with Jahmyr Gibbs, I would not mind any of these Pickems on Gibbs. If you wanted to take the 1.5x multiplier for Jahmyr Gibbs to have a touchdown this week, not going to fault you at all for that. 37.5 rushing yards, not going to fault you to say he's going to have more. 17.5 receiving yards, not going to fault you if you want to say he has more. 58.5 rushing yards, not going to fault you if you want to say he has more. High scoring game environment, Montgomery should be good to go. I expect Montgomery to be the running back that gets more so involved in the red zone. Gibbs to be the running back more so involved as a receiver. And I'm more excited about Gibbs in a full PPR format than a non-PPR league, and the exact opposite for David Montgomery. Now, also going over to a player that I wish I had on more teams. It is very sad that I don't. But Sam Laporta is also someone with how high scoring this game is supposed to be. I don't mind saying that he is going to score a touchdown with the 1.5x multiplier as well. Now let's move this over. Don't care about any of these defensive guys. Going over to Justin Herbert, another one of these quarterbacks. Not a lot of rushing upside. You still start him, though. Almost 18 fantasy points for his projection. Obviously, you're starting Eckler every single week. Obviously, you're starting Keenan Allen every single week. Really, the only question is, can I start Quentin Johnston with no Joshua Palmer No. They have Quentin Johnston at 31.5 receiving yards. Looks like you're just going to be starting the big three here in Los Angeles, and that is it. Now, going over to Atlanta, they have Bijan Robinson at 80.5 total yards, which is right in line with where we ranked him this week. We ranked him in that tier of Rachaad White. We ranked him in that tier of Ramondre Stevenson. Based off his involvement as a receiver, you see he's projected out for 21.5 receiving yards. This is still someone that you're going to have to play every single week. Of course, we got the Texas helmet on, so maybe we're a little bit biased here, hook 'em horns. But to be fair, you're probably just starting him in that full PPR format for the reception volume and then lowering our expectations in that non-PPR league with the lack of involvement in the red zone. Now, going over to what we have with the tight end here in Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is someone that I drafted a considerable amount of this year. And obviously, I wish I didn't. I wish I knew what Johnny Smith was going to do. But I do not mind taking Kyle Pitts for fewer than 6 targets, knowing that we are now getting a Drake London good to go in this game. With London good to go, I don't know. With this involvement for Jonnu, does seem like 6 targets is an aggressive projection for Pitts. Now, they do have Kyler Murray at 18 fantasy points. This is more than guys like Purdy. This is more than someone like Trevor Lawrence. If you wanted to rush out there and play Kyler Murray, I'm not going to fault you in doing so. I would prefer to opt to see if we could get an extra week in here to see what he's going to do first, but that's just me. James Conner, 8.5 fantasy points. You probably aren't super pumped to start James Conner's first week back. You're going to start Hollywood. McBride is a better play than like David Njoku this week. And then the secondary receivers, I know a lot of people are excited about, like Michael Wilson. I mean, you can pick him up, roster him. Don't start him, though. Then going over to Sam Howell, obviously, 2019 Jameis Winston. A quarterback, 18 fantasy points. Not a lot of rushing upside, but a zillion passing attempts, so he is somewhat viable. And then looks like Curtis Samuel is going to be playing this week. So if you're looking at the receivers here, I think someone like McLaurin's still a player that we're starting. John Dodson, on the other hand, probably an option that we want to go through and put on the bench now that you have Curtis Samuel good to go. And then Logan Thomas is kind of up to you, right? Up to you on Thomas. Now, don't care about the defensive guys. Going over to Seattle. Seattle's been horrible this year on the offensive side of things. With that being said, the Washington defense is so bad that the Seattle offense has a top 5 implied team total this week. It should be a top 5 offense. I don't mind saying Walker's going to have more than 77.5 total yards. They have Charbonnet up there at 42.5. So obviously Charbonnet is taking over this backfield on third downs. Metcalf, all the receivers are healthy. You start Metcalf. You can start Lockett if you want. JSN, probably not super pumped to start him. I don't mind taking the higher than 39.5 receiving yards on Underdog, though, given how this offense should be much better this week, how this is a great matchup, the whole 9 yards. Now, going over to New York, you have to start Saquon Barkley, even though it's going to be the worst game environment in the NFL. Spread on this game, 16, 17 points. And I've never even seen this before, but Underdog has a starting quarterback at even odds to have a passing touchdown. Tommy DeVito, more than less than half a passing TD. I'm going to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. Do not think, oh, of course he's going to have a passing touchdown. The implied team total is 11 points for this Giants offense. Like, honestly, I'm staying away from all the Giants Pickems. You start Saquon, and that's about it. Now, going over to Tony Pollard, you got to reiterate, buy low on Pollard if you can. So running back that's consistently getting the volume. It's a good offense. He's going to crush in this matchup. Now, CeeDee Lamb is going to be someone that we're starting regardless. Probably come back down to earth just a bit, though, because obviously you don't need to throw the ball nearly as much as they did in other matchups. And then Ferguson at 36.5 receiving yards. You can't start Ferguson if you wanted to. Zach Wilson, obviously you're not starting. You are starting Breece Hall, 86.5 total yards. You are starting Garrett Wilson. Nobody else in this offense. Right now they have Garrett Wilson at 9.5 targets. I don't mind saying that Garrett Wilson is not going to hit 10 targets. And oh yeah, of course, if you have not done so already, if you wanted to check out any of those Pickems over on Underdog Fantasy, links in the live chat, links in the description, links in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, and that Garrett Wilson special Pickem more than less than half a total yards. So make sure you take advantage. But nonetheless, if you are looking at this, they have met 9.5 targets. Don't mind saying that Garrett Wilson's not going to hit 10 targets this week and taking the fewer than. Should be a very low scoring game environment. Obviously does typically dominate with volume. Now going over to the Raiders side of things, Jacobs must start running back, lower expectations. And this is something that I think I got wrong. I think I was too high on both Davante Adams and Jacoby Myers this week. I just trying to highlight these Pickems. I'm not telling you to take them more than or less than here. I have no freaking idea. Obviously, it is a brutal matchup going up against the Jets, where they currently have Davante Adams at 55.5 receiving yards and Jacoby Myers at 43.5. So I understand probably most people here are going to scream, oh, Myers for sure going to have 43.5 receiving. I understand where you're coming from, but it is a brutal matchup where I think I may stay away from that, to be honest. Going over to Denver, Javonte looks like he is taking over here. It's a little bit less of a three-man running back by committee, even if these other running backs are getting involved. Now, with that being said, if we go over and look at P. Ryan and Jaleel is a running back that I'm fine saying is going to have fewer than 28.5 total yards based off the involvement that he had in this offense 2 weeks ago before the bye, plus the fact that it's a tough matchup going up against Buffalo here. And then going over to Buffalo, stupid simple, you just start Josh Allen. If you have no Leonard Fournette, James Cook's probably someone that you have to start based off of how good the matchup is going to be. I mean, just obviously beautiful spot going up against the Denver Broncos. Stephon Diggs, you have to start him. Gabe Davis, extremely volatile. No idea what the man's going to do. I'm just ranking him as a wide receiver 3 rest of season. And then Dalton Kincaid, that top 5 tight end that you're going to have to start week in and week out going forward. But I think that's all I have for y'all for this video. I will be live later today with all the last minute injury updates, and then live after that, of course, answering all your fantasy football questions. So if you have not done so already, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button here. And if you wanted to check out any of those Pickems over on Underdog Fantasy, promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, and that Garrett Wilson special Pickem more than less than half a total yard. Find that link in the comment section, description, live chat. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate y'all. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later today.